Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one.
The American government has two speeches. The public version talks about democracy, freedom, and global security. The other, found in declassified archives, leaked telegrams, and minutes of secret meetings, tells a different story. Destroyed schools and innocent deaths, weapons of mass destruction that do not exist, wars started with documented lies, lobbies that control foreign policy. These are 14 inconvenient facts the United States government does not want you to know. Fact number 1, the bombing of the Manab school. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury against Iranian nuclear and military installations. The justification was clear: to prevent the Iranian regime from developing nuclear weapons and threatening regional security. Trump announced the operation in an 8-minute video on Truth Social at 2 in the morning and ended with a direct phrase to the Iranians: "The hour of your freedom has arrived." The operation was described by the Pentagon as the most precise and coordinated campaign ever conducted in the Middle East. More than 2,500 military and government targets were hit on the first day, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed in the opening hours. The Western world was told this was a surgical operation against war infrastructure. The first day was not yet over. That same morning, a Tomahawk missile struck the Shajareh-Tayyiba girls' primary school in the city of Manab in southern Iran. The students were in their classrooms. The impact destroyed 2 entire wings of the building. The death toll was initially reported as 108 and revised to 168 in the following days, according to the United Nations and Iranian authorities. More than 100 of the victims were under 12 years old. The school was on the Pentagon's target list. The Washington Post reported, citing documents and sources within the American government, that the school was included on the target list because it was near a communications installation classified as strategic. The calculation of acceptable collateral damage had been applied. The problem? The communications target had been evacuated days before the attack, according to the very officials cited by the newspaper. The school was destroyed for a target that was no longer there. The Pentagon's response was brief. The spokesperson neither confirmed nor denied the attack in the first days. 3 days later, a statement classified the episode as within operational parameters. The United Nations convened an emergency meeting of the Security Council and proposed an independent investigation into what had happened in Manab. The United States vetoed the resolution. 168 people, more than 100 of them children, were closed out in a 2-paragraph statement. The names of some of the dead children circulated on social media before any Western coverage. Zara, 8 years old, Reza, 10 years old, Fatima, 7 years old. The American Senate attempted to vote on the War Powers Act, a mechanism that would require formal justification for the operation. It lost 53 to 47. Congress had been notified after the bombs were already falling. There was no formal declaration of war. There was no vote. There was a video on Truth Social at 2 in the morning. In the first 40 days, the Iranian human rights organization Harania documented more than 1,665 civilians killed, including 244 children. Strikes hit 300 health facilities and damaged more than 600 schools inside Iranian territory. The G7 demanded an immediate halt to attacks on civilians. The operation that had been described as surgical and precise kept producing the same results that previous operations have always produced. What the United States gained from Operation Epic Fury is not difficult to identify. Nuclear disarmament of the only country that threatened American military dominance in the Middle East, control over the Strait of Hormuz, through which 1/5 of the world's oil passes, an opening for a government aligned with Washington and Iran, an ambition that Trump did not hide when he told Iranians that their hour of freedom had arrived. The Manab school was not an accident along the way. It was the result of a calculation. The same calculation applied in Halabja in 1988, in Kabul in 2021, in Kunduz in 2015. A nearby strategic target justifies the risk. The risk materializes in dead children. The government classifies it as an operational parameter and vetoes the investigation. The speech continues talking about freedom and precision. The pattern has not changed. Only the names of the cities and the names of the children have changed. Fact number 2, the lie that justified a war. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq with a precise justification. Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, and possibly nuclear, and represented an immediate global threat that required urgent response. The United Nations Security Council was convened. The world watched. The invasion happened. The weapons were never found. On February 5, 2003, Secretary of State Colin Powell presented to the United Nations Security Council satellite photographs, phone intercepts, and diagrams of facilities that, according to him, proved the existence of the Iraqi arsenal. It was one of the most watched moments of American diplomacy in the 20th century. Years later, Powell would describe that speech as the biggest stain on his career. The evidence was fabricated or distorted. The weapons did not exist. After the invasion and the fall of Saddam Hussein, inspection teams combed Iraq for months. No weapons of mass destruction were found, no biological laboratories, no active nuclear program. The final report of the Iraq Survey Group, published in 2004, confirmed that Iraq had ended its banned weapons programs in 1991. The American government knew this before the invasion. The war cost nearly 4,500 American lives and more than 100,000 Iraqi civilians. But there's a layer that the debate over the 2003 weapons often leaves out. In the 80s, Iraq had real chemical weapons and used them. In March of 1988, Iraqi planes sprayed mustard gas and nerve agents over the Kurdish city of Halabja. Around 5,000 civilians died within hours. More than 10,000 were left with permanent injuries. Children died in the streets. The American government knew about the attack in advance. It did nothing to stop it. Documents published by the New York Times in 2013, based on declassified archives, revealed that the United States provided Saddam Hussein's government with satellite imagery and detailed intelligence on Iranian positions during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. This intelligence was used to coordinate attacks with chemical weapons. American officials knew and continued providing the data. The relationship was too strategic to be interrupted. American companies sold Iraq chemical precursors approved by the Department of Commerce, components used in the production of the same weapons that killed the Kurds in Halabja. In 1983, Ronald Reagan sent Donald Rumsfeld to Iraq as a special envoy, just months after the American government had internally documented the use of chemical weapons by Saddam. Rumsfeld met with Saddam Hussein and discussed strategic cooperation. The same Donald Rumsfeld who shook Saddam's hand in 1983, while Iraq was using chemical weapons with American support, would be the Secretary of Defense, who in 2003 organized the invasion of Iraq, using Saddam's chemical weapons as the public justification. The weapons the United States helped build became the argument for the war, and the weapons that became the argument for the war were never found. The same person, 20 years apart. The same Iraq. The full cycle is this. The United States helped Saddam build and use real chemical weapons in the 80s. Then, they used the existence of those weapons as justification to invade Iraq in 2003, when the weapons had already been used. The invasion killed nearly 4,500 American soldiers, and more than 32,000 returned wounded. The financial cost estimated by Brown University exceeds $2 trillion. Defense and oil companies posted record earnings during the occupation. The American soldiers who died in Iraq died for a justification that the government knew to be false. This is not speculation. It is what the official documents produced after the invasion themselves confirm. No official was prosecuted for fabricating the evidence. No executive of the companies that sold chemical precursors to Saddam was prosecuted. Iraq today is a weak and unstable state. The defense companies that operated during the occupation continue to profit. Fact number 3, the lie that sent 58,000 Americans to their deaths. In August of 1964, President Lyndon Johnson announced to Congress that American ships had been attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. Congress approved a resolution that gave the executive branch powers for unlimited military escalation in Southeast Asia. Within weeks, the first American battalions were shipping out for Vietnam. 58,000 soldiers would never return. The first attack, on August 2, 1964, was real. The second, 2 days later, did not happen. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara himself admitted decades later that the radars probably detected their own wave agitation. There was no torpedo. There was no enemy vessel. The president knew this when he told his advisors that day. He sent the troops anyway. The attack was fabricated to justify a war already decided. The NSA declassified documents in 2005, confirming what internal analysts already knew in 1964. The second incident in the Gulf of Tonkin did not happen as reported. Analyst Robert Hanyuk wrote in 2001 that the NSA had altered data and manipulated reports to sustain the government's version. That report remained secret for 4 years before it leaked. When it became public, the war had ended 30 years earlier. The dead were still dead. Johnson knew the war was unwinnable before even sending it to Congress. Declassified White House recordings show that he told senators in private that he saw no way to win militarily in Vietnam. He said this before the resolution vote. After the resolution was approved, he escalated the conflict anyway. The public justification and the private assessment pointed in opposite directions. Congress approved the war. The young men were called up. The American defense industry made billions from Vietnam. Boeing, Lockheed, General Dynamics, and Dow Chemical profited directly from military contracts during the years of the conflict. Defense company stocks climbed while bodies came home in caskets covered with the American flag. The executives did not go to Vietnam. The sons of poor families from Kansas, Alabama, and Georgia did. More than 150,000 returned with permanent physical injuries. Congress only voted to repeal the Gulf of Tonkin resolution in 1970, 6 years and countless deaths later. No official was held accountable. Johnson died in 1973. McNamara lived until 2009 and left public memoirs in which he acknowledged the war had been a mistake. That did not restore any of the 58,000 dead. It undid nothing. He simply said, decades later, that he had been wrong. Congress accepted the lie. The soldiers paid the bill. 58,000 Americans dead. More than 2 million Vietnamese civilians dead. The pattern that the Gulf of Tonkin established outlived the war. The executive decides, Congress is informed afterward, and young people without political connections are the ones who ship out. That pattern repeated itself in Iraq in 2003. It repeated itself in Iran in 2026. It has never been permanently interrupted by any concrete reform. Fact number 4, the poison. The United States poured over generations. Between 1961 and 1971, the American military sprayed approximately 20 million gallons of toxic herbicides over forests and fields of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The most used mixture became known as Agent Orange, named for the colored stripe on the barrels. The official objective was to destroy the vegetation cover and deprive the enemy of shelter. What happened afterward, nobody had told the public. The main toxic component of Agent Orange was the dioxin TCDD, classified as carcinogenic by the World Health Organization. It does not disappear. It enters the soil, the water, the animals, the plants, and human bodies, and stays. Approximately 8 million American soldiers were exposed in Vietnam. The consequences appeared years later. Rare cancers, neurological diseases, and children with congenital malformations. The government took decades to acknowledge the connection. The companies that manufactured Agent Orange were Dow Chemical and Monsanto. Internal documents obtained through lawsuits showed that both knew, since at least 1965, that the dioxin in their products was highly toxic to humans. Both discussed internally how to conceal the toxicity data from government contracts. They made hundreds of millions of dollars from the production. No executive was criminally prosecuted for this. On the Vietnamese side, the number is different. More than 3 million people still suffer from diseases attributed to Agent Orange contamination, according to the Vietnamese government. Children born decades after the end of the war appear with the same malformations recorded in the children of exposed American soldiers. The dioxin persists in the soil of certain regions to this day. The United States paid partial compensations to American veterans. For the Vietnamese, nothing. In 1984, 7 manufacturers reached an out-of-court settlement with American veterans for $180 million, without admitting fault. The American government only formally added many of the illnesses linked to Agent Orange to the list of compensable conditions for veterans in 2021, half a century after the spraying ended. For the 3 million Vietnamese still affected, no settlement ever came. No one was prosecuted. No one went to prison. Agent Orange connects 2 things the American government preferred to keep separate: the damage to its own soldiers and the damage to the civilian population of the country the United States invaded. Both were caused by the same substances. Both were denied for decades. Both were partially recognized only when lawsuits and public pressure made denial unsustainable. Dow Chemical and Monsanto continued operating. Nobody went to jail. Fact number 5, killing by behavior. Starting in 2008, the American government expanded the use of drones for attacks in Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and Afghanistan. One of the most controversial mechanisms were the so-called signature strikes. Attacks approved not based on the confirmed identity of the target, but on behavioral patterns considered suspicious by analysts. It was possible to die for looking like a terrorist, without ever having been identified. The criteria for a signature strike were never fully disclosed. It is known from leaked documents and investigations by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism that men of military age in certain regions, carrying weapons, common behavior in Pakistani and Yemeni tribal zones, could be classified as legitimate targets. Gatherings of more than 3 people in certain locations could be sufficient to justify an attack. Names were not necessary. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism documented between 2004 and 2020 at least 14,000 American drone strikes in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Somalia. The number of civilians killed is disputed, and with good reason. The American government used methodologies that automatically classified all adult men in strike zones as combatants, barring specific proof to the contrary. Civilians could be reclassified as combatants after death, lowering the official numbers. In 2021, a drone strike in Kabul, executed in response to the airport bombing that killed 13 American soldiers, destroyed a car, and killed 10 civilians, including 7 children. The Pentagon initially classified the strike as successful and announced it had neutralized an attack planner. After independent investigators went to the scene and published the results, the Department of Defense admitted it had killed only civilians. Drones were sold to Congress and the American public as precision surgery, pinpoint strikes that eliminated threats without civilian casualties. The error rate in signature strikes was systematically higher than in strikes with confirmed identity, according to analysis by the Congressional Research Service from 2020. Surveys in Pakistan documented that the fear of drones in affected regions was comparable to the psychological trauma of sustained exposure to combat. Fact number 6. The United States armed groups that became Al-Qaeda. Starting in 2012, the CIA and the Pentagon operated parallel programs to arm rebel groups in Syria against the government of Bashar al-Assad. The CIA program, codenamed Timber Sycamore, was one of the largest in the agency's history, billions of dollars in weapons and training. For groups the American government classified as moderate. The problem was always in the definition of moderate, and the definition was elastic. Subsequent reports from the American Congress and the Department of Defense confirmed that a significant portion of the supplied armament ended up in the hands of Jabhat al-Nusra, the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda. Some groups received American training, then sold or handed over weapons to jihadist groups or merged directly with them. The Conflict Armament Research Group traced armament of American origin in the possession of the Islamic State just months after the original delivery. The Pentagon program to train Syrian rebels, approved by Congress with a budget of $500 million, trained and sent to the battlefield a total of 4 or 5 fighters. That number was revealed by the military command itself in a congressional hearing in 2015. 4 or 5 soldiers trained with $500 million. The rest of the money went to armament that dispersed through the chaos of the Civil War. Al-Qaeda got the weapons. In 2017, Trump ended the Timber Sycamore program, describing it as inefficient. The description was correct, but incomplete. The program was not merely inefficient, it was counterproductive. The weapons that circulated through it strengthened exactly the groups the American government claimed to be fighting. No criminal investigation was opened. No official was held accountable. The program cost billions. It left a destroyed country and jihadist armament across the Middle East. An estimated 300,000 to 500,000 Syrians died in the Civil War. More than 6 million were displaced to other countries. The American contribution leaves a specific mark on that number. The United States armed groups that later committed atrocities against Syrian civilians using American-made equipment. The American government has never been held accountable for where the distributed weapons ended up. The files of the Timber Sycamore program remain partially classified to this day. Fact number 7, the Pentagon Papers. In June 1971, Department of Defense analyst Daniel Ellsberg delivered to the New York Times 7,000 pages of secret American government documents. What was in those pages destroyed the official narrative about Vietnam. 4 consecutive presidents, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson, had lied to the American public about the real objectives of the war and their real chances of success. The documents showed that American military officials internally estimated the war was practically impossible to win, and continued sending troops anyway. They showed that the bombings in Cambodia and Laos, neutral countries, were deliberately concealed from Congress and the public, and that the government had known since the 1950s that South Vietnam would not survive without a permanent American military presence. They continued the war anyway. The Nixon government tried to censor the documents in court. The Supreme Court rejected the request. Ellsberg was prosecuted for espionage. The charges were dropped in 1973 after it was discovered that the White House had organized an illegal break-in at his psychiatrist's office to find compromising material. The analyst who revealed the greatest lie of the American war was persecuted by the government itself. The war lasted 4 more years after the publication. Ellsberg said something that stayed. He said he knew when he delivered the documents that he would go to prison for the rest of his life. He said he delivered them anyway because he could no longer watch young men being recruited to die in a war the government already knew had no way out. He died in 2023 at 91 years old without having regretted it. The papers prove something simple. The American government does not lie only to enemies. It lies to the very soldiers it sends to die. What the Pentagon Papers revealed was not just that 4 presidents lied, it was that the government apparatus had the capacity to sustain a lie on a large scale for decades, with multiple officials knowing and none breaking the silence, until one man, alone, decided he could no longer take it. Ellsberg was the exception. The silence of the others was the rule. Understanding this changes the way one hears any official statement from any government. Fact number 8, the lobby that influences the government. AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, is the most powerful pro-Israel pressure group in the United States. In 2024, AIPAC spent more than $100 million in American elections. Part of that money was directed specifically to defeat congresspeople who had criticized Israeli military operations in Gaza. Some were defeated. Everyone knew AIPAC was watching. In 2007, professors Stephen Walt of Harvard and John Mearsheimer of Chicago published The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy. The central argument: the pro-Israel lobby distorted American foreign policy in favor of Israel's interests. Both were established academics with no history of anti-Semitic positions. They were attacked and accused of anti-Semitism. Discussing the subject automatically made the author suspect, which, in itself, is a political fact. American funding for Israel since 1946 totals more than $300 billion in inflation-adjusted values, according to data from the Congressional Research Service, making Israel the largest recipient of American military aid in history. This funding has remained constant regardless of the actions of the Israeli government: expansion of settlements declared illegal under international law, operations with high numbers of civilian casualties, and rejection of peace negotiations. In 2024, as the number of Palestinians killed in Gaza surpassed 40,000, including more than 15,000 children, according to United Nations data, the American Congress approved military aid packages for Israel totaling more than $26 billion. Congress members who called for aid to be conditioned on humanitarian guarantees were publicly accused of anti-Semitism and faced adversarial funding campaigns in their districts. The vote passed by a wide margin. What Walt and Mearsheimer described in 2007 was not a secret conspiracy. It was a political pressure system functioning as it was designed to function. The difference between the Israel lobby and other powerful American lobbies is not the existence of the mechanism. It is that questioning this specific mechanism has academic and political consequences that questioning the arms, oil, or pharmaceutical lobbies simply does not. This asymmetry is, in itself, a political fact. Fact number 9, anti-drug was just the packaging. In March 2020, the Trump government indicted Nicolas Maduro and senior Venezuelan officials for drug trafficking and narco-terrorism. This was followed by a campaign of sanctions and operations that culminated in Maduro's detention in 2026. The official narrative was about fighting the drug trade. On January 3, 2026, President Trump went to a press conference and explained, without being asked, what was behind the operation. Trump said the United States would manage Venezuela and would maintain a presence in the country with regard to oil. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, 303 billion barrels according to OPEC, more than Saudi Arabia. Lake Maracaibo was exploited by American companies for decades before the progressive nationalization begun in the Chavez era. For analysts at the Brookings Institution, the operation was the Monroe Doctrine in new clothing. The name circulated in political analyses, Donroe Doctrine, a reference to the president's nickname, in historical continuity with America's policy of intervention in Latin America. The pattern is the same over a century: Nicaragua, Cuba, Chile, Guatemala, Panama, Venezuela. The public justification changes: communism, drugs, terrorism. The structural interest remains constant. Hugo Chavez was democratically elected and the target of a coup attempt with American backing in 2002. The Monroe Doctrine was never about democracy. It was about control of resources and sphere of influence. Trump said this out loud at a press conference, which rarely happens. Most American presidents maintained the fiction of the ideological justification. Trump simply declared the real interest: oil. What changes when a president says in public what all the others kept as undeclared policy is only the packaging. The content was the same. Fact number 10, Maduro was captured, but the regime stayed. One of the greatest paradoxes of the operation against Maduro: the United States removed the Venezuelan president, but kept as interim president Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's vice president, who was under American sanctions for corruption. An operation to combat corruption and drug trafficking that leaves in power an official sanctioned for corruption requires an explanation. None was given by the American government. Reports from human rights groups indicated that political repression in Venezuela intensified after Maduro's capture, with arrests of opponents and growing control by the new administration backed by the United States. The narrative of democratic liberation did not survive this detail. Removing a dictator and installing an allied administration, sanctioned by the very government that carried out the removal, has a different name from democratization. In the streets of Caracas, Venezuelans came out to celebrate. After decades of Chavismo, Maduro's capture seemed like the end of a nightmare. There were people crying with joy, flags. The narrative of Trump as liberator stuck for a few days. But then Maduro's vice president took over the government. The Venezuelan people were not freed. They were transferred to a new owner along with 303 billion barrels of oil. Fact number 11, the plan to attack Americans and blame Cuba. In 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States Armed Forces approved a plan called Operation Northwoods and formally sent it to the White House. The plan proposed false flag operations on American soil, blow up ships, organize attacks in American cities, shoot down civilian aircraft, and blame Cuba for everything. The objective was to create popular justification for a military invasion. The document, with signatures of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, proposed developing a list of pretextual incidents to justify American military intervention in Cuba. Among the suggestions, sinking an American ship in the port of Guantanamo and blaming Cuba, creating accidents involving American civilians attributable to Cuban agents, and staging attacks on American installations. These were formal plans signed by the highest military chiefs of the United States. President John Kennedy rejected the plan and fired General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The plans were filed away. The document was declassified in 1997. When it became public, it generated a few days of news coverage and fell into oblivion. The central fact remains: American military chiefs proposed killing American citizens and using the deaths to justify a war. This was not a conspiracy theory. It was a signed plan delivered in writing. Operation Northwoods was never executed. But the question it raises does not disappear. If the Joint Chiefs proposed this in 1962 and it was only one president who prevented it, what happens when the president does not prevent it? The plan was to kill Americans to fabricate a war justification. It was not the idea of an isolated lunatic. It was the official proposal of the highest-ranking military officials in the country, reviewed, refined, and formally delivered to the White House with signatures. Fact number 12. The CIA overthrew 4 elected governments. The CIA's coup manual was tested throughout the 20th century in countries that made one specific mistake: electing leaders who wanted to control their own natural resources. The most documented cases are 4: Iran in 1953, Guatemala in 1954, Congo in 1960, and Chile in 1973. In all of them, there were direct American economic interests threatened by the elected government, and in all of them, the CIA organized the overthrow. In Iran, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh had nationalized the oil industry, then controlled by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The CIA and MI6 organized Operation Ajax in 1953. They financed disturbances and bribed military officials. Mossadegh was deposed, and Shah Reza Pahlavi reinstalled in power. American oil companies received a share of Iranian oil as part of the agreement following the coup. Iranians still call it the day the United States stole their country. In Guatemala in 1954, President Jacobo Arbenz proposed land reform that affected idle land held by the United Fruit Company, an American firm. The CIA organized Operation PB Success, trained and armed a paramilitary force, and coordinated a coup that installed a military dictatorship. Over the next 40 years, civil wars and Guatemalan military regimes killed more than 200,000 people. United Fruit kept operating. In 1997, Clinton formally apologized for the operation. In Chile, the elected president Salvador Allende was overthrown on September 11, 1973, by a coup coordinated with direct CIA participation. Declassified documents confirm that Henry Kissinger worked actively to prevent Allende from taking office, and later to destabilize his government. The American company ITT had asked the CIA to intervene to protect its business in Chile. Allende died during the coup, the Pinochet dictatorship that killed more than 3,000 people in the years that followed. In the Congo in 1960, Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba requested Soviet help when Western powers refused support. The CIA classified this as a threat and approved his elimination. Declassified documents confirmed that Director Allen Dulles sent authorization for the assassination. Lumumba was captured, tortured, and executed in January 1961. His body was dissolved in acid. He was 35 years old. The mineral resources of the Congo continued flowing to the west. Fact number 13. The terror network financed by the United States in South America. Operation Condor was a system of cooperation among the military dictatorships of Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia, financed, equipped, and coordinated by the CIA and the American State Department, to hunt, kidnap, torture, and assassinate political opponents in any country on the continent. It operated in the 1970s. Tens of thousands of people disappeared. The operation used American planes, training provided by the School of the Americas, a United States Army installation in Panama, and communication systems organized by the CIA. Dissidents were tracked even when they fled to other countries. Brazilians were handed over to Argentina. Uruguayans turned up dead in Chile. It was a continental network of political assassinations with American logistics. The State Department knew. Henry Kissinger was informed in detail. A declassified 1976 telegram shows that the American ambassador in Buenos Aires reported to the State Department that the Argentine government was planning political assassinations in other countries. The American government's response was not a formal objection. It was a request that they give advance notice so that the United States would not be caught diplomatically off guard. Kissinger, according to subsequent documents, gave the green light for the Southern Cone governments to act without American interference. The estimated death toll from Operation Condor ranges between 60,000 and 80,000 people. More than 400,000 were arrested and tortured. In Brazil, the military dictatorship that received American support lasted from 1964 to 1985. The National Truth Commission, which concluded its work in 2014, documented 434 political deaths and disappearances directly attributable to the state. No American official was ever tried for involvement. The pattern of Operation Condor, the American government financing and coordinating political violence in allied countries, was not an anomaly. It was a policy. And it was so well documented after the declassifications that it leaves no room for another interpretation. The archives show approval, funding, logistics, and prior knowledge of the assassinations. Kissinger was never prosecuted. He died in 2023 at 100 years old, receiving tributes from heads of state. Fact number 14. The CIA controlled journalists. Operation Mockingbird was a CIA program that recruited journalists, editors, and executives of American and foreign media outlets to publish information favorable to the government or suppress information contrary to it. It operated since the late 1940s. It was confirmed by the Church Committee of the American Senate in 1975. The question nobody managed to answer afterward was simple. When did it end? The CIA never said. CIA Director Alan Dulles cultivated personal relationships with influential journalists from the Washington Post, New York Times, Time, and CBS. In some cases, entire stories were commissioned by the CIA and published as independent journalism. None of the outlets involved was prosecuted. No recruited journalist was prosecuted. The Church Committee recommended the practice be ended. There is no independent confirmation that it was ever actually ended. Frank Church, senator from Idaho who chaired the investigative committee, declared that the scale of the program was incompatible with any functional definition of a free press. The committee documented at least 400 American journalists with formal or informal relationships with the CIA between 1950 and 1975. Director William Colby admitted that the agency used journalists. He said the practice would be discontinued. No independent audit confirmed it was. Operation Mockingbird was not an isolated case of influence. It was a system, a structure with recruitment, funding, and coordination. Journalists with press credentials were used as distributors of narratives chosen by the CIA, narratives that then circulated as verified, independent, reliable news. The reader of a major newspaper in 1960 had no way of knowing the story had been commissioned by an intelligence agency. Operation Mockingbird and the Pentagon Papers are two sides of the same structure. On one side, the government suppresses the information that contradicts the official narrative. On the other, it finances the publication of the information that sustains it. Both mechanisms functioned simultaneously for decades, without the public knowing about either. When an outlet published the official version of the Vietnam War, it could be doing journalism or fulfilling a contract with the CIA. The lesson of Operation Mockingbird is not that every piece of news is a lie. It is that the American government invested decades and considerable resources to ensure that certain stories never came out and that others were published as independent truth. It worked for at least 25 years before anyone found out. How many years it worked after that, nobody knows. But the government's appetite for narrative control did not disappear in 1975. That is what the archives do not cover. 14 cases, 14 files that the American government did not open voluntarily. They were torn out by leaks, lawsuits, parliamentary commissions, and decades of pressure. The official story is what remains after the government decides what to suppress. There are still many cases that were left off this list. Write in the comments if you want a part 2 of this video. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell.